Imagine being caught in the ultimate scandal. Your deepest moral failure, the kind of secret you hoped would stay buried forever, is suddenly dragged into the bright light of day. There is no escape, no spin room, and no shifting the blame. That is the raw, unvarnished reality that opens our deep dive today. We are looking at a remarkable trilogy of ancient texts, Psalms 51, 52, and 53. When you read them together, they read less like ancient poetry and more like a highly sophisticated intelligence report on the human condition.
That is a fascinating way to frame it. If you look at these three passages as a dossier, they map out three distinct psychological and spiritual profiles. You have the broken penitent in Psalm 51, the arrogant opportunist in Psalm 52, and finally, the systemic societal decay of the moral fool in Psalm 53. It moves from the deeply personal interior world of a single soul to the macro level of global human behavior.
Let's start with that first file in the dossier, Psalm 51. The background here is incredibly dramatic. It was composed by King David after he was confronted by the prophet Nathan. David had committed adultery with Bathsheba and, to cover it up, he arranged for her husband, Uriah, to be killed on the battlefield. When the truth comes out, David doesn't hire a public relations team. He doesn't offer excuses. He writes a song of absolute devastating confession.
What strikes me about Psalm 51 is the vocabulary of restoration. David doesn't just ask to be let off the hook. He uses words like blot out, wash, and cleanse. In the ancient world, he even mentions being purged with hyssop. Now, hyssop was a plant used in rituals to cleanse people suffering from leprosy. By using that metaphor, David is essentially saying that his moral failure isn't just a minor slip-up. He views it as a systemic, contagious disease. He recognizes that he doesn't just need a second chance, he needs a complete internal recreation. That is where we get the famous plea to create a clean heart and renew a right spirit.
It is a complete rejection of the superficial. He points out that outward rituals and sacrifices mean nothing if the internal disposition is corrupt. He says the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit and a contrite heart. In a culture obsessed with maintaining appearances, that is a radical concept. It suggests that true strength begins with the courage to admit complete vulnerability.
It really does. It shows how timeless these struggles are, whether we are talking about ancient monarchs or modern leaders navigating the complex pressures of public life. It is that exact intersection of human nature, ethics, and high-stakes decision-making that defines our history.
Speaking of deep dives into complex human dynamics and current affairs, this is the perfect moment to mention one of our favourite partners. If you love exploring the fascinating spectrum of human behaviour, from the high stakes of global security to the cultural phenomena that shape our daily lives, you need to check out The New Sentinel.
Absolutely. The New Sentinel is a podcast that is truly dedicated to providing in-depth discussions and deep dives into an incredibly wide array of topics. They cover everything from the glitz and glamour of pop culture to the strategic and complex intricacies of military operations.
What makes it so compelling is how thoughtfully each episode is crafted. They offer listeners a comprehensive understanding of the subject matter, featuring expert interviews, detailed analysis, and highly engaging storytelling. Whether you are a pop culture enthusiast or someone with a keen interest in global security, The New Sentinel has something for everyone.
So if you want to stay both informed and entertained, make sure to tune in, view, subscribe, comment, and post an inquiry. It is a fantastic way to broaden your horizon.
Now, let's pivot back to our intelligence report and look at the second document in our trilogy, Psalm 52. The tone here shifts dramatically. We go from the quiet, weeping chamber of repentance to a fierce public confrontation. The historical context here is the betrayal by Doeg the Edomite, who reported David's whereabouts to the paranoid King Saul, resulting in the brutal massacre of 85 priests.
This psalm is a chilling psychological profile of a ruthless opportunist. Doeg is someone who doesn't just do evil, he boasts in it. The text focuses heavily on the power of his words, describing his tongue as a sharp razor working deceitfully. It is a profound observation that the most devastating weapons aren't always physical. Words can destroy lives, reputations, and entire communities.
And look at the contrast the writer sets up. On one hand, you have this wealthy, powerful betrayer who trusts in his riches and strengthens himself in his destructiveness. On the other hand, the writer compares the righteous person to a green olive tree thriving in the house of God. An olive tree is slow-growing, deeply rooted, and incredibly resilient. It doesn't rely on sudden aggressive growth or exploiting others to survive. It endures because of where it is planted.
That contrast really highlights the illusion of temporary success. The opportunist looks like they are winning in the short term, but their foundation is built on sand. And that leads us directly into the third dossier, Psalm 53. This one takes a step back to look at the macro picture. It is almost a sociological analysis of systemic moral decay. It begins with that famous provocative line, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God."
When we hear the word fool today, we usually think of someone who is unintelligent or silly. But in the biblical context, folly is a moral category, not an intellectual one. The fool isn't necessarily a philosophical atheist who has analysed the arguments and decided there is no creator. Rather, the fool is a practical atheist. It is someone who lives as if God does not exist, as if there are no ultimate standards of justice and no final accountability.
Exactly. It is the belief that you can do whatever you want because no one is watching and no one is going to hold you responsible. And the psalm shows the direct consequence of this mindset. It leads to universal corruption. The text describes a society where people eat up others as they eat bread. That is a terrifyingly vivid metaphor for systemic exploitation, where human beings are treated as mere commodities to be consumed for personal gain.
It is incredibly modern when you think about it. When a society loses its moral compass, when it decides that there is no transcendent truth or accountability, human beings inevitably become disposable. The strong devour the weak, and exploitation becomes normalized.
It really is a timeless warning. When you look at how religion, politics, and power dynamics clash in these ancient texts, it feels incredibly relevant to the geopolitical and ethical challenges we face in our modern world.
It certainly does. And for those of our listeners who want to understand how these forces of faith, governance, and security continue to shape our modern world, we highly recommend checking out the Global Sentinel.
The Global Sentinel is an exceptional news channel that focuses precisely on that critical intersection of military affairs, religion, and politics. Their mission is to provide comprehensive coverage and analysis of global events related to security, faith, and governance.
They do an incredible job of breaking down complex areas. In military matters, they offer in-depth reporting on defense strategies, armed conflicts, and military technologies worldwide. On the religious front, they explore religious movements, interfaith dialogues, and the profound impact of faith on geopolitics. And for politics, they provide insightful commentary on political developments, international relations, and policy decisions.
What we appreciate most about them is their approach. The Global Sentinel emphasizes responsible reporting, fostering genuine dialogue, and promoting informed decision-making. It is an essential resource for anyone trying to make sense of our complex global landscape.
Returning to our final thoughts on this trilogy of Psalms 51, 52, and 53, we see a profound progression. We move from the personal broken heart of David in 51 to the arrogant, deceptive tongue of the opportunist in 52, and finally to the systemic moral decay of a society that forgets God in 53.
It is like a mirror held up to our own lives. The true meaning of these passages isn't just historical, it is deeply practical for our daily lives. Psalm 51 challenges us to practice radical self-honesty. It asks us if we have the courage to admit when we are wrong and seek genuine internal transformation rather than just managing our public image.
And Psalm 52 warns us against the temptation of opportunism. It asks us how we use our words. Are we using our tongues like a sharp razor to carve out our own success at the expense of others? Or are we striving to be like that green olive tree, quietly rooted in integrity and trust?
Finally, Psalm 53 calls us to examine whether we are living as practical fools. We might profess faith with our lips, but do our daily choices, our business practices, and how we treat the vulnerable reflect a belief in ultimate accountability? Or are we living as if we are the center of the universe, free to consume others for our own benefit?
It forces us to ask where we place our ultimate trust. Are we chasing the fleeting power of deceit, or are we anchoring ourselves in enduring truth?
That is a question that requires constant reflection. It is easy to point fingers at the corruption in the world, but this trilogy reminds us that the battleground is always the human heart. It starts with us.
Let's leave our listeners with that reflection today. How can we cultivate a clean heart and a truthful tongue in a world that so often rewards the opposite? Thank you for walking through this ancient intelligence report with us. Until next time, keep searching for the truth beneath the surface.